We have a rather skewed numbering system when it comes to the royal family. There are, of course, your Williams, your Charleses, and your Henrys, but we also have quite a few Edwards. The last King Edward was Edward the Eighth, but in total, if we're counting from Alfred the Great, England has actually had 11 Edwards in total. For a long time, monarchs were named merely by labels rather than numbers, of course because there weren't that many of them. But somewhere around the third Edward in a row, by 1377, King Edward was dubbed inaccurately Edward III, entirely forgetting 3 Edwards that were in power far before the Norman conquest. Today I'm going to take a look at one of these Edwards, and indeed the label we all know him by, Edward the Confessor. So why was Edward the Confessor? And more importantly, what did he confess? Edward was the son of King Ethelred and Emma of Normandy, and before Edward came to the throne, there was a bit of time between his father's rule and his, where Vikings took over. And if you want to go more into depth into that whole mess, definitely check out that video first. But long story short, Edward was the only heir of the Anglo-Saxon era, and he took over the throne in 1042 after his half-brother, the Viking Harthacnut, died. Edward's reign was not particularly exciting, and not exciting usually means it was pretty peaceful and quite prosperous. And in fact, the most famous thing he did was die, but I'll get to that in a minute. His reign was mostly directed by Godwin, the Earl of Wessex, as basically his closest friend or puppet master. And Edward actually married Godwin's daughter Edith in 1045, placing the Godwin family ever more centrally entangled. A feud broke out between the men in 1049, and so Edward dismissed his wife Edith for a few years. Subsequently, they had a turbulent marriage and never had any children. Edward was not particularly popular as king, especially to those in higher positions of government. Because of this, Godwin was able to gather large support and worm his way back into the king's inner circle. Godwin himself died in 1043, and his son Harold became Earl, and also the king's right-hand man. Harold Godwin was the man behind most of Edward's biggest decisions in his reign. Now to his death in 1066, and that probably sounds like a pretty familiar date. Without an heir, Edward had essentially forgotten to do the one thing that kings are supposed to do. Instead of keeping up the family line, the nation was left floundering for a clear successor. Apparently, Edward had named Harold Godwin as his successor to the throne. However, he also allegedly promised the crown to William, Duke of Normandy. Upon Edward's death, confusion ensued and led to the fateful invasion of 1066 with the Battle of Hastings. So why do we call him Edward the Confessor? A confessor was seen as a holy person who was tortured and suffered for their faith, but not killed for it, such as martyrs. But did Edward really suffer for his faith? Only after his death did his piety start to become a big part of Edward's reputation as monarch. He was a religious leader and his Christianity was important to him. He had commissioned the building of a great abbey in London dedicated to St. Peter, and due to its position to the west of St. Paul's Cathedral, this new building would become known as Westminster, and still stands today as Westminster Abbey. After questioning his motive after causing a succession crisis, his lack of any heirs became a big point of discussion, to demonstrate his chaste life, but his turbulent marriage seemed to be more the cause of no children. He is featured prominently in the Domesday Book, created over 20 years after his death, and made by monks at Westminster Abbey. He is shown having prophecies and performing miracles, and demonstrating his divine right to rule. He is said to have had the king's touch and could cure the sick just by touching them. These miracles are not based in fact, and over the years became even grander stories, but the fact that people believed them is what counts. And so people who made him the pious figure he is thought of today really held him in high esteem. and were pretty motivated to promote his piety for many years after his death. Based on some of these biases, we could assume a few inaccuracies in their depictions. Heading into the 12th century, Osbert of Clare, who was head abbot at Westminster Abbey, felt that they needed a bit more funding. So he started a marketing campaign to increase the importance of the abbey, basically hammering down on the miracles and the piety of Edward. Osbert wrote Life of the Blessed Edward, King of the English, in the 1130s, and these miracles were bolder than ever. Edward's confessor status eventually stuck. In 1161, Edward was canonized and became a saint. Nothing at all to do with the fact that Pope Alexander was trying to get on Henry II's good side. Edward, as saint, became a pretty popular figurehead for other kings, church members, and generally just pious people in the nation. Henry III almost worshipped his predecessor, a part of what was dubbed the cult of Edward. Edward was considered one of the patron saints of England until Edward III pushed in St. George in his place in the mid-14th century. He is still the patron saint of the English royal family, and of kings, and unusually of troubled marriages and separated spouses, which is perhaps a hint at why indeed it was easy for him to remain chaste. King Edward remains the only king of England to be canonised, and so his name kind of makes sense, as a religious figure who is also part of the monarchy. But overall, that is why Edward became Edward the Confessor. A little political, a little bit of greed, and predominantly because he didn't like his wife. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for a few more Why Are They Named That? Please leave your suggestions below in the comments, and as always, I will see you next time.